Yeah, no. Thanks for having us, Mzwandile. The last time we spoke was in November 2024.
Oh, you're even recording when we last spoke?
I've got a clear memory of everything else that we do.
Well, good. Well, last year, around this time, of course, you had totally different colors, but
yes.
I guess we're not there now because I think that has been explained in the past. So you're representing the Umkhonto Wesizwe Party, which is the official opposition in Parliament. So how would you fare your rating in Parliament as the official opposition?
Now look, the past 12 months since the last general elections in South Africa have been eventful 12 months, and Umkhonto Wesizwe has become the most important game changer and role player in South Africa's politics. A lot of things, of course, got to happen in terms of how government was constituted and how Umkhonto Wesizwe got to position itself as an alternate voice to the current so-called government of national unity. I think by proper measure, our members of parliament and public representatives have done fairly well. Many people claim so many victories wrongly, but the presence of Umkhonto Wesizwe has got to change the politics of South Africa. There wouldn't have been a budget impasse in the manner that it is now if Umkhonto Wesizwe was not part of the voices that stood firmly against what a component of the so-called government of national unity was proposing. If Umkhonto Wesizwe was not founded, South Africa will be having 17% VAT today. But because of Umkhonto Wesizwe, because the ANC under Ramaphosa increased VAT before from 14% to 15%. Yes, there were political parties in parliament, but they didn't have any significance to could stop that. But Umkhonto Wesizwe, by its mere presence in South Africa's political landscape, effectively got to prevent an attempt to increase the value-added tax to 17%. So fairly our members of parliament, despite the fact that a substantial number of them didn't have any legislative or public representation experience, are doing fairly well in terms of what they are assigned to do. And there is a scope to could, of course, improve the manner in which our public representatives represent the people in a disciplined, decisive and clear way.
Yeah, I hear you saying your members have been quite doing well from what you are saying. But there's a view there that they are not as significant in terms of the voice as they should be, given the number you have. And in terms of leading the discussion as the official opposition, their voice is not really leading as expected. So why would you say they are at the forefront when the view seems to be a bit different, given that we see parties perhaps smaller than MKP doing that?
Now, look, if you were to pay closer attention to the substantial submissions made by our members of parliament in all the portfolio committees and standing committees of parliament, if you were to pay closer attention, you realize that there is a lot of work that is being done, and there's a lot of policy positions and propositions that we got from our representatives which get to be submitted in the standing committee on finance, in the defense portfolio committee, and a variety of other interventions as well as to just what should happen. And one other thing which South Africa should appreciate is that Umkhonto Wesizwe is not the Democratic Alliance. Umkhonto Wesizwe is not the Economic Freedom Fighters. Umkhonto Wesizwe is its own party, does not play to the gallery for just attention of social media. We do our work and we know what really matters to the people. That is why even before the elections, a lot of people underrated or undermined the capacity that Mkhonto Wesizwe has. A lot of people were shocked, including those who are leading other political parties, that Mkhonto Wesizwe came to represent the true interest of our people. So it's so far so good, but there's a huge scope and space for improvement that can always be effected. Hence, this constant discussion and review of the work of our public representatives.
So is that the reason why the chief whip was perhaps removed yesterday?
No. So, you know, for an organization that is still at the formative stages, there will always be strategic and tactical considerations as to the composition of its leadership collective. And not because someone who is in a position is doing wrong or has done wrong. Sometimes there are strategic considerations that are made in terms of who should play which role. And the leadership collective came to a decision that we should assign Tsikani Colin Makubela as the chief whip in the National Assembly to then work with our party leader, Dr. Mandlakais Hlope, to guide the entire caucus towards a different and much more impactful direction. And that does not reflect on anything wrong that was done by the former chief whip, Mzwanele Manyi. And even before him, there was a Commander Sihle Ngubane. He played his part, and then there was consideration that let's have Mzwanele Manyi as a chief whip. Now there is assigning of Colin Makubele as the chief whip. It doesn't say that there is anything wrong that was done by either of those that were replaced.
I mean, I remember after the State of the Nation address, when the MKP had to respond, I think there was a lot of criticism in many quarters, and then it looked like it was an issue between the leader of the party in Parliament and the chief whip in terms of who contributed what. So did that have to do with perhaps this strategic arrangement?
No, it has got nothing to do with that. But also, one thing which as Secretary General, as a disciplined member of Mkhonto Wesizwe, I will never do is to speak about internal discussions of Mkhonto Wesizwe which are not due for public communication. So I don't know about the so-called differences about the State of Nation address. And as far as we're concerned, there are critical issues which, in his response, the Deputy President of Mkhonto Wesizwe, the party leader, raised. There's an issue which he raised about the Richards Bay minerals. Like there's a company there that has been exploiting our natural resources, made commitments with the communities of Richards Bay, and is not honoring those commitments despite repeated commitments. And he raised that sharply. And he also raised sharply a counter-narrative against this illusion that President Zuma's term as head of state and president were 9 wasted years. He was able to systematically and systemically illustrate that President Zuma's contribution is objectively and qualitatively far much better than all other heads of state that ever got to occupy the position of president here in South Africa.
I think one of the things that the MK has been saying is to get black parties in the main to work together. But we are seeing a lot of perhaps disagreement from some of the people we think should be your natural key allies. For example, the economic freedom fighters. They've made it clear that, I mean, they don't see themselves working with you as the MK. I mean, saying, I think your contribution basically as a party is quite insignificant.
Yeah, it's very difficult to understand the political and ideological position of the EFF currently, because the EFF is co-signatory of a charter which unites the Progressive Caucus in Parliament, which espouses common values and principles. But in some other articulations, I think there was a characterization of Mkhonto Wesizwe as enemy number one, and then I think their leader said in one of the platforms in the recent past that the MK is led by a stupid and the followers are stupid and everything is there. But we have never got a substantial submission of what causes such a very sorry and unfortunate, unintelligent observation. What we know is that there is a common program which is contained in the Progressive Charter, which unites the Progressive Caucus in Parliament. And in our own internal discussions as Umkhonto weSizwe, we took time to characterize all political formations in South Africa. And we then said our characterization of, for instance, the ANC is that despite it having been captured by the white capitalist establishment, it doesn't become an enemy force. It becomes a strategic opponent which is contested. That is our characterization of the ANC. And then we said the EFF is not even an opponent. We said it's a potential strategic ally, because it more or less espouses in its foundational documents and perspectives, it espouses more or less the same values that Umkhonto weSizwe espouses. ATM is our strategic ally, and we then categorize the Democratic Alliance as part of the enemy camp. What maybe could help in terms of this politics of South Africa is that let's rise above subjectivity and deal with proper ideological and political characterizations of just what is the environment that we're in and how do we relate with the different political forces. But the childishness and subjectivity will undermine otherwise a necessary cause for the unification of all progressive forces, not just in Parliament, but on the ground. There's no need that if Umkhonto weSizwe, EFF, ATM identify that their service delivery challenges in the municipalities of Alfred Nzo, of Matatiela, Mzumvumbu, Ntawa Mkulu, Winematikizela Mandela municipality, we must then organize separate matches to deal with issues of service delivery. We must do that jointly. To say that these are the issues that we are raising. And it's not about dissolution of any party, it's about unification of the strategic objectives of just that, what we seek to achieve collectively on behalf of the people. I did say earlier that it's very difficult to understand the position of the EFF, because in as far as we're concerned in terms of what we got to agree, we are core signatories of the Progressive Caucus Charter, which unites us in the anti-racist, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist agenda, which unites us in pursuing the expropriation of land without compensation, which unites us in fighting for the reclamation of our natural resources, for free education, for a progressive agenda. So like, until maybe there is something coded or written down to say that such is not what binds us together, I am unable to want to analyze the EFF based on what is said in public as rants and chants.
I think one of the things that they say quite publicly is that they feel MK is actually destroying the EFF. Perhaps you are actually the prime example that MK took their second most senior person in the EFF. Whether you did it voluntarily, but the fact of the matter is that you were the second in command in the EFF. And then,
so I'm the one who took the decision to join Umkhonto weSizwe. I was not recruited. I went to join Umkhonto weSizwe. I approached Umkhonto weSizwe to say I want to join and become an ordinary member. Because I thought that as an ordinary member I can contribute in the growth of the organization and be led as well. You know, the unfortunate reality, or fortunate, I don't know, is that since I was age 21, I've always been at national leadership level, from the SASCO, Young Communist League, ANC Youth League, EFF as a deputy president for 10 years. All of those things, I've always had national leadership responsibilities. I went to join Umkhonto weSizwe myself. I was not forced or pushed or pulled by anyone. I was pulled by a principle which I still ascribe to now. So there is no one who is destroying the economic freedom fighters. If there was an intention to do so, we could have a program to recruit members of the EFF to join Umkhonto weSizwe, which we can successfully do, by the way, including the national officials of the EFF. We can be able to recruit them, because a lot of them, when we appraised them before we joined the MK, as understood squarely and fairly well why it had to be done in that particular way, including provincial and regional leaders. It can be done, but we're not in a mission of trying to destroy the EFF. We're in a mission of having a political and ideological organizational decision and discussion as to how do we unite all the progressive forces. We're having, by the way, there's a model that we have had discussion with the African Transformation Movement under the leadership of course, President Zungula and the spiritual leader, Professor Caesar Nongong. And sound discussion. There is no threat of dissolution of the ATM. And the ATM doesn't feel threatened, none whatsoever, by the MK. Joint rallies, joint programs. Actually, the membership on the ground even got to print a T-shirt which has got ATM logo this side and MK logo on the other side. So that is basically what we're busy with, of unification on an agenda of all the progressive forces. There is no intention, none whatsoever, to dissolve and liquidate any of the organizations that should form part of the progressive bloc.
We saw President Ramaphosa in the US recently, visiting President Trump. When he was inaugurated on the 20th of January, as the MKP, you issued a statement congratulating President Trump, saying he was going to perhaps help in terms of restoring or fighting for some of the oppressed people. Do you still share the same view?
No. So this is the context of the MK statement on Mr. Donald Trump. One was that he is going to stop the support of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which was spiking a world war through support of Ukraine and fighting against Russia. Because at some stage, if that support had continued, it was going to force Russia to then call on its strategic allies like the People's Republic of China and other friends to join in its defense. And that was going to spike a world war. Then we say that we know, as a matter of fact, because he was saying that during campaigns, that he will never associate with NATO, he will never associate with Ukraine. That is what we appreciated. The second thing is that the United States of America's imperialist program before Trump was to force feed developing nations the so-called green transitions in terms of energy sources, which was green colonialism or neocolonialism in the manner that it is. That to the extent that South Africa almost, actually not even almost, South Africa had even agreed to close its coal power stations because the US was bullying South Africa to take that agenda. And Trump doesn't associate with the green neocolonialism that is existing in the world. Then we say that in terms of that, he's not a warmonger. He's one of the very few heads of state in America who has never gone to war, even when he was the president for the first time. And that is what we got to appreciate in terms of global peace, in terms of pulling back, in terms of the imperialist green agenda which was being imposed on the developing nations. But we don't agree with the politics of Donald Trump in terms of how they got to characterize South Africa's developments and politics currently. We don't associate with the racist nature and on how he relates with everyone else there. Because the engagement that happened with Mr. Ramaphosa was just a pure reflection of the racist nature of how white political leaders get to view black political leaders. First, he said, no, for you to come, you must bring white people so that they can speak on your behalf. And then Ramaphosa agrees to that. Second, he makes him to explain absolute nonsense and rubbish. The American government and intelligence services know that there is no genocide in South Africa. Why would you want to call people to come and explain that? Umkhonto weSizwe's position is that we don't agree with the politics of Donald Trump. We appreciated the two aspects in terms of the anti-war and the anti-green imperialism.
Well, moving towards closure.
Yes.
Maybe let's talk about you.
Yes.
Visiting people who are wanted here in South Africa. Shepard Bushiri. And then your party issued a statement dissociating you from that. So what informed you to go and see someone who's wanted, who's a fugitive?
So, you know, in March the 21st, we visited Namibia with President Zuma. So when we were in Namibia, in the table that we were sitting in after the official inauguration, we were sitting with former President Joyce Banda of Malawi. And we're also sitting with the incumbent Deputy President Michael Uthi of Malawi as well. And then we had, you know, like, because we were in a table, small talk, exchange contacts. And President Zuma said that we must make follow-up on the discussions that were being raised there. So I went to Malawi to see former President Joyce Banda, and I spent a lot of time with her. And then I went to see incumbent Deputy President Michael Uthi, who had very meaningful discussions. And both are a proper leadership which can change the politics of Malawi if they were to be given whatever responsibility they can be given in the future. But also here in South Africa, we had been in discussions with one of my former colleagues in the Pan-African Parliament called Enoch Chihana, who is one of the presidential candidates there. So we want to have a political discussion whose outcomes we will communicate once we're mandated to communicate in terms of what were the discussions. And after that, I went to see Prophet Shepard Bushiri and to have broad discussions. I know him, like we used to have interactions when he was here in South Africa. And then he said that I'm going to a church service later on. Let's go. Where am I to could refuse to go into church? Like I've been to so many churches. I've been to the Nazareth Baptist Church. I've been to so many churches in South Africa. And what I was even interested about is that during my visit there in the Easter period, there were more than 5,000 South Africans were in Malawi to go to the church specifically, not for a political program that was there for. More than 5,000 South Africans that were there to visit the church. I'm not a law enforcement agency. And as far as I'm concerned, there are no issues. There is no directive in Malawi. The church of Shepard Bushiri is protected by the Malawian state. His households are protected by the Malawian state. In terms of what happens, he plays a huge role in terms of development of Malawi, in proper investments that are happening there, and appreciated by the people of Malawi. I went to the church because who am I to refuse to go to the church? I had to go to the church, and I didn't speak anything at the church. I just attended to listen to the sermon.
But the optics, Mr. Shivambu, you are a leader of the official opposition in South Africa.
Yes.
And this individual is a fugitive from law in South Africa. So those optics, and on top of it, your party issues a statement dissociating itself.
I think the unfortunate statement was out of the misunderstanding as well of what got to transpire in terms of the visit itself. And I'm not a law enforcement agency, one, but two, factually, there is no court ruling in Malawi which South Africa has been pursuing to declare or characterize Bushiri as a fugitive. If there was such, the Malawian government was going to hand him over. But I'm saying to you now that if anything, the Malawian state is protecting him like in terms of his own security, in terms of what gets to happen. And if the South African government wants to pursue him, they know what processes they must follow, they must deal with, and everything else there. By the way, I can go to any church, even of convicted criminals, Like whichever church I want to go to, I can go to any religious institution as long as I believe that is a correct thing to do, and everything else there. Like I'm not the only person who does that. I say to you now that there were more than 5,000 South Africans who were registered to participate.
But they're not the Secretary General of MKP.
Yeah, they're not Secretary General of the MK, but I have the permissibility to go to any religious institutions. I, by the way, don't know what criminal offenses the other people whose churches have visited have committed in the past or have got to participate in. But I went to Malawi for a political program which was mandated and was very impactful in terms of the Pan-Africanist program and agenda which Mkhonto Sizwe is in pursuit of uniting Pan-Africanist and progressive forces all over the world and in the continent in particular. And Malawi is of particular interest because in the struggle against apartheid, Malawi associated with the apartheid government under Hastings Banda, the president there, they openly supported apartheid. They had full economic cooperation with apartheid, and we can't have a Malawi that is not part of Pan-Africanism, of a Pan-African developmental project. So the politics of Malawi must be contested and guided from that point of view. So that is what we're busy with in Malawi. I thought I must clarify this because people thought that I was in a religious pilgrimage. I was not in a religious pilgrimage. I was in a political visit which had to deal with political issues.
Well, Mr. Shivambu, thank you very much for agreeing to sit with us and explain a number of issues, including this one.
Thank you very much for having us, and we really appreciate that the public broadcaster is truly a credible institution, and it must continue to play the role that it is playing.
Thank you very much. We try to be reflective of every voice of this country.
No, thank you.